Creepy Reddit stories and Minecraft parkour are some of my favorite ways to unwind. If you're home alone or need some company while you get things done, stick around for some spooky tales and intense parkour action. Alright, time to jump into the first story. Yellowstone National Park, October 2015. I'm an amateur photographer, and one night around 4 a.m., I found myself out alone in the Firehole Basin area of the park. My plan was to capture a long exposure shot of a geyser erupting, with the Milky Way stretched across the sky above me. In the end, the photo didn't turn out well. When geysers erupt, they release huge plumes of steam that kind of blur that beautiful night sky you're hoping to capture. Anyway, I parked my car and hiked a little way to get closer to the geyser I wanted to photograph. Then, I set up my tripod, adjusted all the settings, and waited for the eruption to happen. The night was crystal clear, perfectly silent, and really cold. As my ears adjusted to the quiet, I started to hear the gentle burbling of the spring that feeds the Firehole River. Some distance behind me, I could hear the wind rustling through the trees and leaves softly moving on the ground. In front of me, there was rumbling and hissing deep beneath the earth as the White Dome geyser prepared for its next eruption. An owl hooted somewhere above, and far off in the Midway Valley, I caught the faint howls of wolves. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could see the Milky Way stretching like a river of light across the horizon. Millions of stars sparkled, cold and bright. Orion hovered over my right shoulder, and Venus shone just above the horizon, so bright it almost hurt to look directly at it. Then, out of nowhere, behind me, I heard loud, heavy footsteps pounding closer and closer. Something big was coming right at me. A bear? Bigfoot? Some terrible creature born from the boiling depths of the geyser, here to exact revenge? I didn't know, but I knew it was close. Then a massive buffalo brushed right past me. I was frozen in place, completely still, almost resigned. This huge bull, a mountain of fur and horns, emerged from the darkness, steam billowing from its nostrils in the cold air. It felt like standing in the path of a freight train. He passed as if I wasn't there, carefully stepping around my tripod, then stopped about 10 feet in front of me to relieve himself. Slow and deliberate, he grunted, then lumbered on. I stood there afterward, wondering how I was supposed to take a photo if the geyser erupted before my hands stopped shaking. That buffalo encounter sounds intense. Would you risk trying to take the photo, or just stay frozen and wait it out? Moments like that really make you appreciate how unpredictable nature can be. So, let's move on to the next story here. I often take walks at night around my rural neighborhood. Over the years, I've crossed paths with black bears, coyotes, bobcats, and even some feisty deer. And honestly, none of that really bothered me much. But the strangest, creepiest thing that ever happened wasn't an animal at all. One night, I noticed this small black pickup truck driving by. It was covered in rainbow and unicorn stickers, blasting some kind of bubblegum pop music. The weirdest part? The whole thing smelled like cotton candy as it passed me. The first time it drove by, it suddenly swerved like it was trying to hit me, but I jumped out of the way just in time. I didn't think too much of it at first. Figured whoever was inside just got startled seeing me out there in my reflective gear. But then the truck circled back and came straight at me again. This time I was ready. I scooped up my dog and dove into a ditch just as it sped past. That's when I heard it, this high-pitched, almost maniacal little girl laughter coming from the truck. It was chilling. The truck made a third pass, but by then I was hiding in my neighbor's bushes. I watched it creep down the road, still hearing that eerie giggling as it went. Thankfully, it kept driving away, and I made it home safe. Even now, thinking back, that night still gives me the creeps. It wasn't exactly hiking, more like car camping, but we were deep, way out there, in the middle of nowhere, on BLM land in Colorado. We had driven for about an hour and a half down a Forest Service road, and in all that time, we didn't see another soul. Our campsite was so isolated, you could spot headlights or hear engines from miles away. It wasn't the kind of place where someone could just sneak up on you unnoticed. We had 3 cars with us, and 8 people total. After dinner, we cleaned up, and as the sun faded, we walked back toward the cars before heading into the tents for the night. That's when we saw it, the front right tire on every Every single car had been slashed, not worn, not punctured by the road, deliberately cut, each one in the exact same spot. At first, we thought it had to be a prank, but the longer we stared, the more that uneasy feeling grew, until it became very clear this was no joke. That realization hit all of us hard. The group went from confused to genuinely alarmed. We all had spares, but out here, there was no cell service, no way to call for help if something else happened. And the thought that someone had been close enough to do this without us hearing was deeply unsettling. One of the guys had a firearm, so while the rest of us worked quickly to put on the spare tires, he kept watch over the campsite. Every movement in the shadows made us tense. Every sound in the wind felt like footsteps. We didn't waste any more time. As soon as the tires were replaced, we got back on the road and headed for the highway. When we finally had a signal, we called the police and a park ranger, gave them the coordinates, and explained exactly what happened. The officer told us we'd done the right thing leaving quickly, and to be careful out there. Even now, I still think about that night. The idea that someone had been watching us, waiting until the perfect moment to approach. It's the kind of thing that makes your stomach drop, and that feeling has stayed with me ever since. That's nightmare fuel right there. Knowing someone was lurking close enough to slash tires but stay hidden. What would you have done if you didn't have a gun or spares? Crazy how vulnerable you can feel out in the wild. Here's the next one. I was a student at the University of California, Santa Cruz a few years ago. Since the campus is nestled right in a beautiful redwood forest, I'd often go for runs on the trails around there. One day, I left a bit later than usual and took one of the more isolated paths. That's when things started to get weird. About 15 minutes into my run, deep in the woods, I hadn't seen a single soul. Then, up ahead, I spotted a man, looking homeless, dressed in ragged clothes, walking along the trail. He was heading further into the forest, and since the sun was setting, it looked like he planned to spend the night out there. I wanted to reach my usual checkpoint before turning back, so I kept my distance and ran past him. Just as I passed, he called out, "What came first, light or sound?" I thought, okay, this guy's a little off, but I decided to play along and shouted back, "Light." He muttered, "Well, I think it's sound, but who knows?" and started mumbling to himself. As I moved on, after hitting my checkpoint, I turned back. It was dark now, and I was nervous about having to pass the guy again. He seemed unstable, maybe even dangerous, but I didn't have much choice. When I reached the spot where I'd seen him earlier, he was nowhere to be found. There were no other paths, so if he'd left, I should have seen him. Suddenly, from up on a hill, I heard a girl scream for me to stop. I stopped and looked up, but it was too dark to see clearly. My heart was pounding. I called out to check if she was okay, and soon enough, she started climbing down the steep hill. She told me she'd been out running too, when the creepy homeless guy started harassing her, chasing her up the hill. She had no idea where he'd gone after that, and was planning to spend the night there until I showed up because she was too scared to go back down. At that moment, we both just wanted to get out of there. Who knew if that man was still lurking in the shadows, watching us? So we ran back together and made it safely to the road. She thanked me, and we went our separate ways. I never ran that trail again. Santa Cruz can be a strange place. There are stories about students who flunk out and end up living in the forest. Maybe that man was one of them. That's a seriously unsettling encounter. What would you do if you heard that scream in the dark? It's wild how strangers can suddenly become your only safety net. All right, let's keep it rolling. I want to start by saying I don't really believe in ghosts, but this one night still sticks with me. I was about 13 and had spent most of the day fishing. I decided to stay out late, trying to catch some bullheads from a local watering hole. Normally, I'd take the usual trail home, but that night I cut through some thicker brush to get to my grandparents' place so I could call my mom. I figured she'd be worried since I stayed out late sometimes. On the way, there's this abandoned graveyard I'd passed before. It's all overgrown and wild, no real path through it, but if I stuck to the edge, I'd hit the road and be almost home. The day had been pretty chilly for late spring, but that night, it felt like it was getting colder. So cold, I could see my breath. The moon was nearly full, lighting up the graveyard since it was wide open. No trees blocking the light. As I approached, I noticed a thin layer of fog on the ground, and then I saw a person standing there. At first, it didn't seem strange, so I stayed quiet and stepped into the woods to avoid being seen. I didn't recognize who it was. I ducked behind some trees and lost sight of them for a second, but when I looked again, they were gone. It happened so fast, and I didn't hear a sound. I kept walking, feeling a bit uneasy. Nearby, there was a rundown barn or something like it. As I got closer, I saw a woman inside, maybe in her 50s. The moonlight made her look incredibly pale. She seemed to be digging, but I didn't hear a single noise. No shovel scraping, no sound at all. I was about 30 feet away. Then she stopped and vanished behind some debris. I decided to get out of there fast. I tried to keep an eye on where she went, but she seemed to disappear completely. I made it out to the road, a small country road with fields on one side and woods on the other. The fog was thick, covering everything. As I walked, she started appearing and disappearing in front of me and behind me, like some game of hide and seek. She never made a sound, always pale and only visible in the moonlight, sticking close to old house foundations and barn ruins. Once I passed that stretch of road, she vanished for good, and the air suddenly felt warmer. The whole experience freaked me out so much, I never took that route again. I told my uncle about it later. He went to check the place out, thinking maybe someone was digging up graves or something, but he didn't find any signs of disturbance. People thought I was making it up. Still, even now, just thinking about it gives me chills. Maybe it was just someone wandering around, but what I remember didn't feel normal. She never made a sound, and somehow she seemed to appear and move around me. Once she was right behind me, and moments later, she was standing right in front. It was about 1 in the morning when my dog rang her little bell. I groaned, got up, and took her outside. When she needs to go this late, I usually just let her out in the side yard. I grabbed a flashlight just in case she needed to do more than pee. I was standing there, waiting for her, watching her do that little dog circle thing before she picks a spot, when suddenly she froze. Her ears went up. She whipped around like something had startled her. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, a young woman just standing there. I didn't hear her approach. I didn't see her walk up. It was like she had appeared out of nowhere. From where she was standing, she would have had to come from between my house and my neighbor's, which didn't make sense, because behind our homes, there's nothing but a green belt. It was maybe 40 degrees outside, but she was wearing short shorts and a t-shirt. I told her she startled me, and she mumbled something like, "Nice night, what are you up to?" I said, walking my dog." Then she asked if I knew how to get into her house because she'd locked herself out, and she pointed toward my neighbor's place. Now, I know my neighbor. This was not her. My neighbor is a single woman in her 30s, and she and my wife are friends. So I asked, "That house?" She nodded. I told her, "You don't live there." "I know who lives there." She just scoffed and wandered into my backyard. I followed her, asking, "What are you doing?" That's when she bolted, sprinting toward my fence. And this isn't an easy fence to climb. It's a deer fence, about 3 feet of cattle gate at the bottom, with almost invisible stainless steel wire running across the top. If you didn't know it was there, you'd probably trip. But she cleared it without hesitation and vanished into the greenbelt. I had my pocket knife on me and my very unhelpful dog. I checked around my yard, my neighbor's yard, even shined the flashlight into the trees, but there was nothing. I have no idea who she was, how she got there, or what she wanted, but she scared the life out of me. Whoa, that's straight up creepy. What would you do if a stranger just wandered into your backyard like that? Definitely not the kind of late-night walk you want. All right, let's move on to the next story. I like going for late-night walks, usually around 1 or 2 in the morning. It's quiet, peaceful, almost nobody else is out. But a couple of months ago, something happened that still makes me uneasy. I left my house around 1:30 a.m. and started wandering through town. Everything was normal until I decided to head home about half an hour later. That's when I noticed it. A black van rolled slowly down the street, but I paid a little more attention when I saw it pass by me again for the second time. I told myself it could have been a coincidence. Still, I kept my eyes open. About 10 minutes later, the same black van came down the street again. This time, I was certain it was the same one because it had no license plates. My chest tightened. I sped up my pace. The next time I saw it, the van didn't just pass by, it stopped right in the middle of the road, a few houses ahead of me. I froze. Then, without thinking, I turned and ran in the opposite direction. I darted through side streets, making quick turns until I spotted a yard with a tall fence. I slipped behind it, crouched down, and tried to stay quiet. Moments later, the van rolled down that street, slowly, searching. It eventually passed, and when it didn't come back, I stayed put for about 20 minutes before heading home. I didn't even bother with the front door. I went straight through my bedroom window. Even now, every time I go for a late night walk, I think about that black van, and I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't noticed it in time. It was summertime, just around dusk, and I was camping with my dad at a remote campground. There was a lake right next to the site, and we'd sometimes follow a rough trail through the forest along the shoreline, because if you went far enough, there was a beautiful waterfall at the end. On one of these hikes, a few strange things happened. First, we came across a slash pile, just a big heap of branches and brush, and sitting right on us was a little kid's shoe. It was odd, but we kept going. We reached a small clearing, and my dad stopped to take a quick bathroom break. He faced one side of the clearing, I faced the other. That's when we both heard it, a child's voice saying, clear as day, I'm over here. My dad thought it was me. When he realized it wasn't, we both started searching. We spent a good half hour calling out, walking around, trying to find whoever it was, but there was no one there. After that, we decided to skip the waterfall and head back toward camp. But the whole way, we kept hearing it, the sound of something moving just behind us, twigs snapping, bushes rustling, always close, but never close enough to see. We made it back without seeing anything, but that was the last time we camped there. That's a creepy one, right? Hearing a kid's voice with no one around would freak me out too. What would you do if you heard that on a hike? So, here's the next. I was walking around my neighborhood one night, just enjoying the cool air and looking at the stars. There's a little pond near my house with a small wooded area next to it, some trees, a bench, and even a rope swing that hangs out over the water. I sat down on the bench to watch the sky. After a while, I heard rustling off to my right, somewhere near the trees. Where I live, bears aren't unusual, so I pulled out my flashlight and aimed it in that direction. Nothing. The noise had unsettled me, but I kept my flashlight on and tried to stay aware. For some reason, I stayed put, which, looking back, feels like the kind of dumb decision people make in horror movies. A few minutes passed, and I didn't hear anything else. I started to relax, leaning back on the bench, flashlight pointing down to avoid ruining my view of the stars. That's when I caught something in my peripheral vision, movement in one of the trees. The branch was swaying slightly, and the rustling had returned. I sat up, watching it closely, but I didn't shine my light right away. I figured it could be a large bird or something else I didn't want to startle. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it was echoing in my ears. I kept staring, and eventually the movement stopped, but there was still a shape in the tree. Bears can climb, so I didn't want to run and risk drawing attention. Finally, I worked up the nerve to lift my flashlight and aim it at the branches. What I saw made my stomach drop. It was a man. He was crouched in the tree, completely still, staring at me with his eyes opened impossibly wide. His expression never changed. When the light hit him, he started to move, like he was going to climb down. I didn't wait to see if he did. I jumped over the bench and sprinted straight for my house. I went in through the back door, locked it immediately, and checked every other door and window. I even checked the attic. I haven't gone out there alone since. Moving forward with the next story. When I was about 5 or 6, my dad used to take me on all sorts of adventures out in nature. At the time, we had a little cottage up in the Scottish Highlands, and on one trip, he decided we were going to hike way up into the cliffs. My dad was in his mid-50s then, but still quick on his feet, a mix of Irish charm and Yorkshire grit. I didn't mind the idea at all, because it meant I'd get a piggyback ride for most of the hard parts. His goal was to reach one of the highest bluffs, so we could get a full 360-degree view of the meadows and the sea beyond. Eventually, we made it to the top plains, all short, wind-blown grass, stretching for miles in every direction. That's when my dad suddenly stopped. He went completely still and quiet. When you're little, your parents feel like they're invincible. Seeing them look frightened is worse than anything your imagination can come up with. I tugged on his arm, asking what was wrong. I thought maybe he was sick. My mom had epilepsy, and I'd seen her have seizures before. If something like that was happening to him, I wouldn't have known what to do, especially up there on a cliff with no one else around. But just as suddenly as he froze, he snapped out of it. Without a word, he lifted me over his shoulder and started striding away. As we moved, I glanced back over his shoulder and saw it, a large, pale yellow shape sticking up out of the ground like some kind of strange monument. I didn't know what it was then, but now I know it was an old refrigerator. Years later, when I asked my dad about it, he tensed up. Then he told me something I'll never forget. When he was a boy in the 1950s, he and some friends had found a fridge out in the woods. Being curious kids, they opened it. In was the body of another child. He never told me the gender, which made me think the remains were badly decomposed, but he's never been willing to give me more details. I remember once, when we were watching a Simpsons episode about Homer's childhood trauma, where he finds a dead body, my dad got so uncomfortable, he left the room before it ended. So when he explained what he saw that day on the bluff, I assumed it was just an awful memory resurfacing. I told him, "Oh, Dad, that's awful. So when you saw the fridge up there, it brought it all back?" He looked me straight in the eyes, like I'd completely missed the point. His voice dropped low when he said, "No, it was because it was the same fridge. That one's definitely haunting. What do you think happened?" I like to hike in the woods around my town, sometimes so late that I end up watching the sun rise from out there. The strangest thing I've ever come across happened on one of those late-night hikes. I was deep in the forest, well past midnight, when I spotted something unusual through the trees. It was what I can only describe as a shanty town, a handful of rough shelters thrown together from scrap metal and bed sheets. In the center, a small fire pit made out of an old tire, and the fire was still burning. At first, I thought someone must be nearby, but the place was silent, completely still. Whoever had built this, whoever had taken the time to light that fire, was gone. No footsteps, no voices, no movement. From the way it was set up, it could have held a dozen people or more, but there was nothing left except the flicker of flames in that tire pit and the abandoned belongings tucked inside each empty shelter. Let's keep going. Most of the time, it's just what I hear. Big fallen branches, snapping somewhere just outside the reach of my headlamp, or waking up an hour after falling asleep and hearing footsteps in the leaves, close enough to notice, but far enough that I'm too tired and maybe too afraid to get up and check. I tell myself it's probably nothing important, but one time, after a late-night hike with friends, we got back to my car and froze. My SUV was covered in prints, footprints, handprints, maybe even paw prints. They were huge, way too big to be from any animal out there. Some even dragged slightly, leaving smudges in the dust along the doors and windows. The place we'd been hiking was right near a large military base in the mountains. I've always thought maybe some local enlisted guys had made them to mess with us, but the thing was, it was too perfect, too unsettling. Standing there in the dark, staring at those marks, it felt like something out of the Blair Witch Project. No animal did it. That much I'm sure of, and whether it was a prank or not, it worked. Hey, if you're loving these stories so far, don't forget to hit subscribe and ring that bell. Take a quick break, maybe grab some water. This ride's just getting started. Let's keep this creepy train rolling. I used to spend my summers bouldering with friends near a big forest about an hour and a half from where I lived. We'd sometimes camp out there overnight to save travel time and money. One trip, I think it was our third or fourth time camping there, my friend had left her climbing gear and rucksack outside her tent. At least, we're pretty sure she did. The next morning, her boots were gone. A few clothes were missing. All of her chalk powder had disappeared too. We told ourselves maybe she misplaced it, even though we were almost certain it had been right next to her tent. We didn't really want to believe someone had stolen it, so we came up with the idea that maybe she'd left it by the boulders and some animal took an interest. It sounds silly now, but at the time it felt reasonable enough. Fast forward a year, same camping spot. We were sitting around after dinner, just hanging out by the tents. It was pitch black beyond the campfire's light. I walked a short distance away to take a leak, and that's when I saw him. A man in a full ghillie suit, lying on his stomach, facing directly toward our campsite. I froze. The moment he realized I'd spotted him, he jumped up and bolted into the darkness. I still don't know if it had anything to do with my friend's missing gear the year before, but the image of that figure lying there in the dark has stayed with all of us. We've never gone back, which is a shame, but maybe it's for the best. That's creepy as hell. Would you stick around or get out fast? Either way, I'm glad they got out safe. So, let's dive into the next one. Years ago, before we were married, my wife and I went to a local state park for the afternoon. We brought a picnic, a hammock, and set up in the woods. After eating, we ended up dozing off together in the hammock. I woke up to my wife shaking me. She didn't say a word, just motioned for me to be quiet. The sun had already set, and there was only a faint glow left in the sky. In the trees around us, it was too dark to see much of anything. She tilted her head, telling me to listen. At first, nothing, just complete silence. Then, the sharp snap of a branch somewhere in the distance. The silence returned until another branch cracked, same direction, but this time closer. A moment later, we heard the crunch of leaves from a completely different spot. We started whispering to each other, trying to figure out what was moving out there. Both of us had small pocket knives and a flashlight, but we didn't want to turn the light on and give away our location. We debated whether we should try making a run for the car. Then, rapid footsteps heading straight toward us, and then stopping dead. My wife had had enough. She yelled into the dark, "We know you're out there!" For a long moment, there was nothing, no sound, no movement. Then, one more crunch of leaves. That was it. We pulled out the flashlight, pointed it where we'd heard the noise, and switched it on. 3 deer bolted off into the trees. We both laughed nervously, packed up our things, and headed out. Let's jump into the next. Back when I was in college, up in the North Georgia mountains, my friends and I went night hiking all the time. I'd gotten pretty comfortable with the trails, maybe too comfortable. One night, there was a full moon, the weather was perfect, and the visibility was incredible. Everything was washed in that pale blue light you only get on nights like that. I was feeling adventurous, just a little bit stoned, and decided I'd go for a short hike by myself. The trail I chose was simple, flat, maybe a mile loop, in a pretty secluded area. I had a flashlight with me, but I barely needed it with the moon so bright. At first, it was peaceful, beautiful even. Then, out of nowhere, I got this uneasy feeling, and almost instantly after, I heard a man's voice. It was somewhere up ahead, off to the right of the trail, and he was crying. Normally, I'm the type of person who'd want to help, but this time, my stomach dropped. It wasn't normal crying. There was something off about it. It was loud, almost theatrical, but at the same time rambling, incoherent, like someone who'd completely lost touch with reality. Underneath it all was this high-pitched strain, as if he'd been holding back a scream for hours. My first instinct was to call out, to see if he needed help, but it was like my body shut down my voice entirely. Something in me knew I needed to stay silent. I turned back the way I'd come and started walking as quietly as I could. The crying didn't stop. It just kept going, echoing in the distance. My hearing tunneled in on it. I was terrified of snapping a twig or catching my boot on a root, terrified that the sound would suddenly get closer or turn into a scream. It didn't. Eventually, it began to fade, and I made it back to my car without seeing him. But the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that any second he might come bursting out of the woods toward me. Once I was in my car with the doors locked, I just sat there, shaking, letting the adrenaline burn off before I drove back. I've never once felt guilty about leaving him out there. I know what I heard, and I know, with absolute certainty, that if I'd shined my flashlight even once, he would have seen me. That's seriously chilling. Would you have stayed to help or done the same and got out fast? Back in high school, a few friends and I decided to take an overnight hike in the Rockies near our little town. We were pretty stoked. The plan was to camp high up, soak in the views, and just enjoy being out in the wild. We found this sheltered spot tucked inside a grove of trees, away from the wind, and thought it was perfect for the night. We built a fire, ate dinner, and settled in for some relaxed chatting under the stars. But then, out of nowhere, my friend suddenly lunged forward and doused the fire with our emergency water. The warm glow died instantly, plunging us into pitch-black darkness. We were stunned, angry even. There was no reason for him to do that, but then we saw it. His face had gone completely white, his eyes wide and frozen with terror. He couldn't speak, couldn't even move. We finally managed to coax out a few words. He told us to look up toward the ridge where we'd originally planned to camp. At first, it was hard to make out in the darkness, but then we saw it. A massive bonfire, blazing bright like some ritual fire. Around the flames, figures moved slowly in a circle, humanoid, but not quite right. Their limbs were unnervingly long and thin, like something out of a nightmare. Their movements were slow, deliberate, and eerily synchronized. One of my friends swore he heard them singing. a low, haunting melody. I don't remember hearing that part, but the whole scene felt like it was straight out of a horror movie. Off to the side, apart from the circle, one figure leaned casually against a tree branch, but the branch was way above our heads. I'm over 6 feet tall, and that branch was at least 7 feet up. That thing must have been huge. We were frozen, caught somewhere between disbelief and terror. Eventually, exhaustion won, and we managed to get some sleep, but none of us dared return to that place. The next morning, we went back to investigate. The fire pit was still there, smoldering, but the figures and fire were gone. We found charred animal bones in the fire pit, probably a chipmunk or something small, and a pile of rodent skulls, burned black. And then, near the tree where the tall figure had leaned, there was blood. Not a lot, but enough to send a cold shiver down my spine. We called the local fish and wildlife rangers and told them what we saw. They said it was probably just kids messing around, but none of us believed that. No kids would move like that or be that tall. To this day, those mountains terrify me. Something was out there, something not human, and I don't ever want to go back. On to the next story. When I was 14 or 15, I attended this outdoor education boarding school nestled in the Victorian Alps, Australia. Almost every weekend, we'd spend days hiking through the mountains, sometimes 2 or 3 nights, sometimes longer. We'd all heard the local legends from teachers and townsfolk about hermits living out in the wild, drifting between old cattlemen's huts, sometimes in shacks hidden away from the world. At the time, we brushed it off as just stories teachers told to scare us. But on one hike, at the tail end of a harsh winter, that skepticism was shattered. We were on a 4-day trek, and the weather was brutal, gloomy, foggy, and bitterly cold. The Victorian Alps are dotted with these old cattlemen's huts, relics of the past. We usually hiked from hut to hut, but never stayed inside. It was a school rule. On the second day, hiking a steep ridge cloaked in thick fog, visibility was near zero. The valley was swallowed by gray mist. Everyone trudged along silently, heads down, too cold to talk much. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement. A black dog about 50 meters down the side of the ridge. It wasn't a dingo, more like a border collie, sleek and wearing a collar. Before I fully processed it, a man appeared behind the dog. He looked ragged, homeless, darting between the trees, his eyes fixed upward toward us. I quickly told my mate, and we both urged the others to look. But in the moment they did, he vanished like a ghost. Everyone else just shrugged, convinced it was some day hiker with his dog. We joked about it being a hermit, but that was the end of it. Or so we thought. That night, we camped near Vallejo Gartner Hut. We couldn't stay in the hut itself, so we set up our tents nearby and cooked dinner. As darkness settled in, the unease from earlier crept back into my mind. There's this little toilet at the hut with an incredible view overlooking the valley, and I had to go. Sitting there, I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. The walls were covered in scribbles, names, messages, a chaotic patchwork of graffiti you usually tune out. But then I saw it scrawled across the wall in big letters that made my blood run cold. Run, 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 he's coming, run. I didn't hesitate. I finished and scrambled out of there, faster than I thought possible, heart pounding. I dashed straight to my tent. The guy I shared the tent with was the other person who'd seen the man and his dog earlier. So I told him what I saw. We lay there in silence, the night stretching out before us, every sound amplified, every shadow seeming to creep closer. Eventually, exhaustion claimed us. Morning came, but the nightmare wasn't over. We woke to find huge chunks of our food missing, bags unzipped, packs opened, tent flies undone. At first, we thought maybe a wombat or some critter had raided us, but the way the packs were unbuckled and food strewn around told a different story. I'm convinced the man we saw was a hermit, one who'd followed us to camp, watching us in silence, then stolen what he needed under the cover of darkness. That hike shook me in a way nothing else ever has. Even now, I can't think of those mountains without feeling that same chill, that there's something or someone lurking just out of sight. That whole experience sounds like something straight out of a thriller, being followed, those creepy warnings, and then the food disappearing. I don't blame you for feeling on edge the entire night. I'd have been glued to every sound around me. Moments like that really stick with you. It was a mild December day in New England, and my then girlfriend and I decided to take a short evening hike at a local state park. We picked an easy trail that led up to this old stone tower, a bit mysterious and kind of cool looking. We brought a little weed with us and spent some time up on top, just hanging out as the sun started to dip. We smoked, talked, and soaked in the view. The tower overlooks the trail leading up, and while we were up the stair, we noticed a man walking up toward us. He was dressed all in black, moving casually, but with purpose. Being a teenager and a little stoned, I glanced over at him and quickly packed up my stuff, thinking it was better to be discreet. Since it was getting dark anyway, we decided to head back down. As we made our way down the 3 or 4 levels of the tower, something felt off. We didn't see the man anywhere. The tower is pretty open, with windows everywhere, and you can see quite far in all directions. But he was gone. No sign of him anywhere around or on the trail. It was strange, but since I was a little out of it, we just shrugged it off and walked back to the car. A few months later, I stumbled upon stories that chilled me. Turns out, my experience wasn't unique. There's a local legend about a man dressed in black who appears near dark, walking up to that very stone tower. Some say if you watch him long enough, he just vanishes into thin air. Reading that gave me chills. I was glad the thought of ghosts didn't cross my mind at the time, or I might have freaked out completely. That wraps up today's creepy stories and parkour adventures. Thanks so much for sticking around and watching. It really means a lot. If you're still here, don't forget to hit subscribe and drop a comment sharing your favorite story. All right, catch you in the next one.